Yes, very good.
Sorry for this afternoon. Yeah, that's it. Brian, I think he's going to come up.
Yes. Yeah. There's all the
I didn't pick up my little present from you.
in the Chewbacca thing.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Enjoy. See you later.
Okay, I think we can better make a start,
Yes.
even though Angus is still in interviews, but I know he wants to be here, but I think we will make a start, James, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's
Looks fascinating as always. I love the title page. So James, are you up in York, James?
yeah. Well, I'm just outside Whitby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And welcome everybody else who's joined. It's nice to see some master's students. And yeah, I'll hand over to you, James.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for rolling up to listen to me, and thank you again, Ruskin Mill, for sponsoring this my PhD, which has come after a lifetime of practical activities. So I'm 1 year on now in a part-time PhD. So I've kind of done 6 months in everybody else's time, and it's been quite a learning experience. But I think I've just about made it after year one. And the key thing that has really connected for me is that much of the kind of work and research and thinking that I've been doing in practice over these last sort of 30, 40 years, I think I've started to find a connection with this new language, the language of academia. So I've got a lot of slides to show you, so I'm going to crack on. This is where the technology doesn't. Okay, let's try this. Okay, so my original PhD question was basically about the threefold social order. It's basically asking the question, is the threefold social order as envisaged by Rudolf Steiner in 1919 after the First World War, is it still relevant today? Lots of people say, well, threefold social order, it'll never work, it can't work. I think this is asking the wrong question, because the threefold social order is basically about the threefold social organism. And fundamentally, that is about that. The focus of threefold social organism is about social togetherness. It's about what I would call social immunity, a word that I'm going to use quite a few times as I go through this presentation. It's about what do we need to do to provide the kind of base note for our ability to reconvene as human beings and find common purpose. So here's a few things that Rudolf Steiner said about the threefold social organism and threefold social order. He spoke about the intellectual life being linked to the material life, and you can see from this is the life of thought. And everything that predominates in people's collective life in society has developed in such a way that this intellectual life is a reflection of material life. Basically saying we're overthinking. We've entered a period in which the social organism suffers hunger, in which it thinks too much, in which its head system is too strongly developed. You can see this is not about forms. This is about ways in which we sort of connect with a different and understand our reality in a different way. He says the decline of a real spiritual life has meant a gradual starvation of the social organism. And he says the tragedy of modern life is that we live only with ideas about what is dead, whereas the social organism requires us to awaken impulses that are applicable to what is living. And here's something that really resonates with me. You can't bring people together inwardly through phrases. One can only bring them inwardly together if one has the will today to change to radically different habits of thoughts and feelings. And when we think about social change, I mean, obviously, very often we turn to socialism. This is what he says about that. The call for socialism ignites in the consciousness of people precisely because of their subconscious, strong antisocial tendencies are awakening. So in a way, socialism is precisely, and revolution in particular, is particularly related to that awakening of antisocial tendencies, the tendency to calculate difference rather than perceive unity. So people will not be able to exist in the future without finding a reflection of their own being in the external social organism. And we know what this means. All right, I hope you can't see that. I've got something showing on my screen. So yeah, I mean, we summed that up in the healthy social life is a life found only when in the mirror of each soul, the whole community finds its reflection. And when in the whole community, the virtue of each one is living. And I'd say just again, before, as I end this little section, it's not about threefold social order is not about specific forms. Of course, it is about the separation of different kinds of activities in the organism. For example, the social from the cultural, from the economic. But fundamentally, threefold social organism is about the awakening of social capacity. And I would say stimulating social immunity. So I want to talk a bit now about how, in a way, how I got here, because after 35 years of studying the honeybee and particularly propolis, so I want to share with you, in a way, how this kind of feeds into this issue of the threefold social organism, and particularly of this concept of immunity. So in propolis, we have propolis, which is the honeybee's basic immune defense mechanism. And I say right now, the honeybee as a superorganism, not the individual bees, the whole organism. It's propolis that enables that organism to stay healthy and immune resistant, to protect itself. And the word was defined by Aristotle, and it means before the city. In very real sense, propolis was the defender of the city, defender of the superorganism, which is the honeybee. And it does this in various ways. It does it by, it uses propolis as a physical building material. It uses it as a sort of sterilization agency. And it uses it to mummify invaders. And in this sense, what it's doing, it's protecting by sealing up invaders, or whether they be the mouse that creeps into the hive in the winter, which the honeybee can sting but can't remove. So it coats it in propolis, and that mouse will remain sterile for tens of years. And in fact, that's exactly how it works on a micro level too, because if we take the viruses, for example, it's the flavonoids in propolis that seal up the virus and prevent it from becoming active within the organism. So for the honeybee, propolis is, and for the superorganism, propolis is a kind of three-dimensional defense. It's physical, i.e. it's structural, it's social, it's hygienic, it's a sterilizing agent, and it's sort of existential or pharmacological. It's an adaptogenic. It keeps the balance of bacteria and viruses in the hive. One of the things that we've discovered in looking at propolis is that wherever you find it, the chemistry is different, and so is the biology. And so what we have for the honeybee is we have a unique kind of immune response that, so to speak, in the language of Ruskin Mill, emerges out of the genius loci, the geographic genius loci of the area in which the bee finds itself. So you can see from this slide that in subtropical zones, the the something like 300 to 400 biochemicals that were found in propolis are dominated by phenolics, and this gives the propolis a stronger antimicrobial property, whereas in temperate zones it's dominated by the flavonoids, and this has a more antioxidant. Now we turn this into a kind of, you know, application in terms of how it works for human beings. So you can see, and in the Mediterranean zone, there's a kind of there's a balance, sort of. But the basic reality is, and this is a good example in Brazil. There's a plant called Baccharis dracuniculifolia, and it grows in a polluted area of northern Brazil where there was a lot of mining, and it is adapted to the cancerous environment by producing these very rich resin buds. Remember, the resin is the bee's immune system, which the bees love, and they protect their hives in those areas with it. And what we find then is that particular propolis has strong cytotoxic capacities, and has been used to help treat cancer. This story is replicated in many areas, and we have a global research project looking at this role of this unique role of the kind of immune system and geographical zones. Of course, human beings also have unique and individual three-dimensional immune systems. We have a nervous system, a respiratory system, and a metabolic system. In anthroposophic terms, of this thinking, feeling, and acting. But in terms of immunity, your immune system goes down if you have a physical trauma, an emotional trauma, or an existential trauma. And this has been reported on by an anthroposophic Dr. Thomas Hardmuth. He says, the more diverse and individual the microbiome is, colonization, the better the protection against infections. He said this should actually turn our concepts of health upside down. It's not the presence of viruses and bacteria that make the disease, but when certain bacteria are not present. So you can see here that with this, we're looking at every individual has a unique immune system, and that immune system is affected by, we respond in terms of our immune response in different ways. I won't spend too much time on this, but this was an example of someone who did some research on radical remission from cancer, and they found that different people responded when they'd been given a terminal diagnosis in different ways. Those people who'd been given a diagnosis that said they were going to die, they said, oh no, I'm not, and they reacted in different ways. And I put those different ways into my three-dimensional context, and you can see that that context is that some people got well by taking a physical route, some people got well by releasing suppressed emotions, by taking a social route, and other people found the strength to survive by following their intuition or deepening their spiritual connection. So propolis supports the human being's unique individual human immunity in lots of ways, but it doesn't do it by shock and awe. It does it by uncoupling bacteria. In the case of bacteria, it does it by switching off the quorum sensor, which is something which brings a chemical signal which brings bacteria together, or signals that they can get together in and produce things like MRSA. In terms of viruses, just like the mouse, it seals up the protein coating of the virus so that the virus becomes inoperative. And the same with inflammation, it blocks. So you can see that the words it uses, they're not interventionist, they're kind of related. So it's uncoupling, it's sealing, it's blocking, it's switching off. The social organism is also, as we know, threefold. It has cultural, social, and economic elements to it, and it's the well-being of a community. Well, I'll just pass on. We know that the well-being of a community is more the more work you. I'm going to pass on this because that is the key thing. But the essential thing is that the healthy social organism is one which balances the unique function and relationship between the social, economic, and cultural, between in the human being, between the metabolic system, the respiratory system, and the nervous system. So we've got problems in all three realms, and I'm moving towards the concept of the metacrisis here, or as seen by academia. So we have those problems, and in a sense, we've got community collapse disorder, just as the honeybee has colony collapse disorder, where the bees go out and they suddenly just disappear. What holds them together, and this is a frighteningly stark image of what happens when you stress the complex immune system to this level. The bees simply fall apart. They just disappear, not in a great clump as a single organism, but the parts just fall apart. And I think, the metaphor holds. In fact, I don't think it is a metaphor, as you'll see. The metaphor or model holds true also for the community. We very much become one-dimensional beings, and in terms of the academic view of the global metacrisis, as it's referred to, we are in the process of a kind of a global social, economic, and cultural meltdown. I just wanted to refer to the fact that, in a sense, I've been working with these concepts for a long time. In Nature's laboratory, the strapline is three-dimensional health. We have three different areas of initiatives in the economic realm, which is basically Nature's laboratory, in the social realm with the dispensary with various initiatives there, and in the cultural realm with research initiatives and my BARC project. Here's the dispensary. It's looking at sort of threefoldness. It's looking at social, economic, and cultural health, as well as just physical health. And in Three's company, which is helping organizations to balance their social organism, as it were, it's helping groups to recognize and balance their social life, their cultural life, and their economic life, as opposed to what primarily counts is in business, i.e. their economic life. And the BARC is part of bringing all of that together, and that involves a research center, a discovery center, and a sustainable community. So this brings me to my meeting with academia in York University, and it was interesting itself how things work, because I met the guy who became my supervisor at a meeting on meaningful business, and I found that the ideas that I'd grown up with, that I'd kind of embedded in me through my work, were recognized, albeit with a slightly different language, by the academics there. But it turned out that one of the key academics was also interested and involved in shamanic healing. So I thought, here's somebody that I think that might be the bridge for me in terms of converting the practical work that I've been doing into the sometimes complex and language of academia. The group of people that I'm working with, see themselves as pracademics, so there was a very positive connection for me in that sense. And I've been working with the Transformation Research Group and the International Transformation Community, many of which are saying there is no answer to the complex interrelated problems that we have, and that what is needed is some kind of change of consciousness, something I'll come to, which of course is what Rudolf Steiner has been saying to us for many years. And that what we need to do is understand and look at ways in which we can navigate the metacrisis. So what is the metacrisis? Well, the metacrisis is the interconnected, mutually reinforcing crises, ecological, social, economic, cultural, with a potential for catastrophic impact on humanity and the planet. This is the shorthand version. And it's seen by academics in the transformation realm as being a fundamental failure of the way we think, science and scientific thinking. And there's been a kind of evolution of this crisis in terms of its name. It started off, it was all about the environment. It was an environmental problem. And then it was an environmental problem and an economic problem. And then it was an environmental problem, an economic and a social problem. And now you see creeping into it a sense that we are beginning to recognize that the problem in the metacrisis involves the way we see ourselves as human beings. Because the scientific answer, not only can it not understand the totality of the problem, it can't embed that kind of analysis either into effective policies, i.e. the bridge from the academic into the political. And even if it gets into the political, it's very difficult to find the impulse to put those ideas, those concepts of transformation into practice. So I want to mention 3 separate examples of how academia is seeing the metacrisis. One involves this evolving consciousness, and that's through a project called 3 Horizons. The other is through the work of Ian McGilchrist, illustrated through his book, The Master and His Emissary, which really talks about the relationship between the left brain and the right brain. And I think most importantly for me, in terms of what's made the biggest impact in sort of creating a synthesis with my own work, the work of Ulrich Beck in his book, The Metamorphosis of the World. So for 3 Horizons, what's happening is that we're trying to relate Horizon 1, which is business as usual, which is you're just keeping things as they are. That mindset is sort of managerial and incremental and control oriented. And Horizon 2, there are people looking at some kind of transition. They're recognizing the need to change, and the mindset there is innovative, but still opportunistic, trying to develop the system, but in a way which is helps one to survive in a fundamentally unchanged context. And Horizon 3, which is looking at the emerging future, where the mindset there is is visionary, it's exploratory, it's values driven, and it's meaningful. And here's a oft quoted illustration of that, and you can see those flows of the 3 different horizons. Turning to Ian McGilchrist, he of course has done a huge amount of work about the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and basically through his story of the Master and His Emissary, a story which apparently originated with Friedrich Nietzsche. He says that the Master, in a sense, is representative of the right hemisphere. That's a wise ruler who sees the big picture. The emissary is the left hemisphere, who, in a way, is the implementer. He's the servant of the the master, but he comes to think that he's doing all the work and the master just sits there in charge. And then comes the crisis, and McGilchrist is saying we have a major crisis now, where the emissary has taken over, and we can only see things in a sort of fundamentally in a left brain way. I think this is a very interesting and worthwhile area of understanding, particularly as McGilchrist himself sees this fundamental shift of consciousness as being very important for our survival as human beings. And here's just a sort of image of that left brain, right brain. But it's the Metamorphosis of the World by an Ulrich Beck, who was a very well-known sociologist, both in Germany and in the UK. He was at the LSE and in University of Munich. And he's talking about, and I've just included 3 elements of his thesis, but he's saying that something is taking place which is more like the metamorphosis of the caterpillar to into the butterfly. There's a new reality forming. And the world is rather like the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. And he says, we need to look at this. It's rather like an alien invasion effect. Sort of bad news actually is good news. And maybe human beings will stop fighting each other when the aliens invade, i.e. when things get really tough. And that climate change he sees is effectively the alien nation. And in terms of the way in which we control this change, it certainly isn't with nation states, because he uses this term zombie countries. Borders now are imaginary lines. Radiation clouds, viruses, financial crashes don't stop at border checkpoints. Nation states act like they're in charge, but they're powerless. So I like this idea of his. The theory of metamorphosis goes beyond the theory of world risk. It's about the negative side effects of goods. Sorry, it's about the negative side effects of goods turning out to be the positive side effects of bads. So it struck me that Ulrich Beck was onto something here. He of course didn't make that connection with the biological concept of metamorphosis, but I did, and it seemed to me that the biological concept is something that effectively Rudolf Steiner was talking about when he was talking about the huge change that was coming. He said it was not just spiritual; it would be biological, and that by exploring the biological concept of metamorphosis, we have the only real effective, intellectual concept that can help us to understand how we as human beings face the metacrisis. So I took a look at Rudolf Steiner's concept of metamorphosis, and of course he talks about our consciousness evolving. So here's a sort of echo of academia's approach. He said there could be spiritual and biological changes. Rising intellectualism, rapid technological acceleration, weakening traditional religious structures, increasing individualism, competition of everybody against each other. And he warns us of the dangers or the destiny of technology, at a time when that wasn't quite so fashionable as it is now, and said that the metamorphosis, that this would come through the development of intelligent machines, electromagnetic influences, globalization, biologically transformative technologies, So he knew what he was talking about. And in terms of metamorphosis, he's saying metamorphosis is not a metaphor. I would say it is a model of, he says metamorphosis is literal, biological and spiritual evolution that's currently in its early stages. And metamorphosis of the dead brain thinking towards the warm, intuitive thinking of the heart. So metamorphosis again is in that kind of chrysalis-like stage where we are moving towards a deepening of intuition, empathy, and collaboration with rather than competition. Going to crack on with that. So here's a concept of metamorphosis, which in a certain sense is meeting the mechanistic concepts that academia is developing, but offering something much more, and in a way pointing to the biological form of metamorphosis as a way in which we might look. So I come back now to the honeybee, because I think there's much to be learned here in terms of that evolutionary and metamorphic process or journey. And here's what he says about the honeybee. He says the consciousness of a beehive, not the individual bees, is of a very high nature. Humankind will not attain the wisdom of such consciousness until the next major evolutionary stage, that of Venus, which will come when the evolution of the Earth stage has finished. Then human beings will possess the consciousness necessary to construct things with a material they cannot create within themselves. I think this is so interesting. And he says, well, you know, that whoever looks at a beehive should actually say, with an exalted frame of mind, making this detour by way of the honeybee, the entire cosmos can find its way into human beings and help to make them sound in mind and body. And this is because he's given us the example of someone who's of an organism, if you like, that has been on the journey. It's actually whether it's completed it or not is not the point. The point is it has evolved, and what Rudolf Steiner is talking about is an evolution of humanity and of consciousness. So he's saying that this is because that which we experience within ourselves only at a time when our hearts develop love is actually the very same thing that's present as a substance in the entire beehive. So he's saying that in this sort of metamorphic process that has taken place, that has led to the beehive, that the whole beehive is permeated with a life based on love. In many ways, the bees renounce love, and thereby this love develops within the entirety, within the whole society, within the whole superorganism, or within the whole individuality, if you like, of the beehive. And of course, we know that the bees are having a bad time. So metamorphosis, is it, you know, as an explanation, as a sort of model through which we might try and understand the metacrisis, navigate the metacrisis? Is it a metaphor or a model? Well, we've heard what Rudolf Steiner said, and I like to think of applying this model by thinking that that metamorphosis is the end of caterpillarism as we see it, because in a certain sense, the social model in which we live, dominated so much by capitalism, involves an organism, a superorganism, which you might say humanity in its largest form, but also groups, organizations, cultures, ethnic groups, also superorganisms dominated by this particular form are actually undergoing a transformation. They're undergoing a kind of total change. But with the model of metamorphosis, we in a sense know, well, we know both from the biological model and we also know from Rudolf Steiner that this is not the end, it's just the beginning of something else. And here's where, this is how we look at the biological form of metamorphosis, and in particular, the role of imaginal cells. Imaginal cells, and I'll send these slides around to everybody. So, but essentially, the imaginal cells which are present in the caterpillar from the very beginning, in the form, in the egg, and so on, these imaginal cells, effectively carry the blueprint for the adult butterfly, and at a certain point, and at a certain point, there is that kind of colony collapse or that community collapse. It's reached a point of an inability to retain coherence, an inability to retain the immunity, and the immune system of the fights these imaginal cells to start with, but then, as it were, gives in, and the imaginal cells, which contain the butterfly right from the beginning, begin to kick in and multiply very quickly, and lead out of this sort of super proteins and amino acids, construct this amazingly different and wonderful butterfly. So I think my intuition, but I also think we can start using this concept as a source of imaginative hope, in the sense that, if human beings are in a social organism, they're all held together in different kinds of groups, except that the whole of humanity, so to speak, has evolved around a particular kind of model, and we've reached the end of that model. Maybe it's just in the West. It doesn't really matter. We know we are facing this crisis, and if we are to understand that we are not just a material being, but we are three-dimensional, and we have a spiritual reality, and that picture that Steiner gives of the human being totally and fully present from the very beginning, and the material form purely being a sort of, if you like, a casing that has the capacity to evolve and unfold that human being, then I think we have a model which takes you back to the spiritual world, and it gives you hope. But I think even without the spiritual model, I think if you can imagine and convey your imagination of the concept of metamorphosis, I think in the context of a decaying world, which is causing massive anxiety in the human population, we've got to try and make that, provide something which helps people to make that step forward. And going back to the imaginal cells, it seems to me that the imaginal cells in any case are already here, and I'd make Ruskin Mill Trust one of those imaginal cells. I think that I've met many young people who I now see as kind of imaginal cells. They're already going through a process of transformation. They're already in a sense embodying that. And of course, they're finding it. They can find it a very hard time as our kind of one-dimensionality resists them. But I think they're there. So all of this thinking, has led me to kind of reframe the PhD question not to exclude the threefold social order per se, but to include the concept of metamorphosis within the context of the process which so many people now, including Rudolf Steiner, believes that we're going through a process of total transformation. So the new PhD question is basically he's asking the question, which explanations of the metacrisis offer human society most in terms of our ability to understand and relate to the crisis, as well as offering the greatest practical and psychological support in navigating a crisis, which implies total transformation and an unpredictable future. So I defined what the metacrisis was. It's an interconnected, mutually reinforcing crisis, ecological, social, economic, and cultural, with a potentially catastrophic impact on humanity and the planet. The way we will approach this is through the publication of 3 articles, which will look at the problem, the process, and the practice. And I hope you can see that the threefoldness there in terms of the thinking, feeling, the cultural, the social, and the economic, or the practical, the activity. So Article 1 will cover all of these questions. And basically, it will seek to define what the metacrisis is. And here's where I have to learn that new language. I have to learn that language of literature reviews and looking at what's been said about it, not just in the literature, but out in the world, and then explore what human beings are now thinking about as strategies for that, and to see whether we can isolate, if you like, the best strategic approach to the metacrisis. Now, I've set off with I'm not mentioning metamorphosis at this point as what I think the answer will be, but that's what I think. But of course, within the doctoral process, I can't say that at the beginning. I have to ask the question and imagine that that's what the answer will be. So Article 2 will look at the process. So having understood those things that seem to be addressing the metacrisis, we look at how we can share that understanding, and to what extent will our chosen option, in brackets metamorphosis, demand that we extend or amend our current ways of thinking in order to understand and act appropriately in relation to the metacrisis. And then finally, in Article 3, we will look at the practice. And here's where I think we can talk about, in a way, and I can say it in this gathering. Here's where we can talk about the spiritual scientific point of view. We can look at the evolution of human beings, and we can look at models which are relevant in the environmental realm, the economic realm, threefold social order, social and community realm, community living, the cultural and spiritual realm, and all the advice and information that Rudolf Steiner gave us about how we can, if you like, make safe, adapt, and evolve as human beings into an ability where we can understand and perceive the best and most appropriate direction to take within our unique context. And that's where I come back to us as social organisms, superorganisms and social organisms. And so, going back to that individuality and immune systems, and one man's immune system is another man's poison, so to speak. Our immune systems operate in different ways, and around the concept of metamorphosis, we need to understand that uniqueness. And I think this kind of locks in so much with, if you like, the imaginative and pictures that, for example, the genius loci investigations can give us in helping us to locate ourselves within a particular context and hopefully take right decisions. And that is the end. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Gosh, a lot of food for thought there, James.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a heavy meal, but I'm just trying to kind of join up the dots.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to do there, but I'm just basically sharing a kind of update of the direction, the rough direction.
Directional travel. Yeah. Can I ask a question? My question. I loved your presentation, by the way, James. I thought it was great. And I love your turn of phrase. You've got a beautiful turn of phrase. And so I thought that was excellent. So is your doctorate going to be via publication then? These 3 publications rather than a specific dissertation?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I think it's in a way it's still evolving, because my supervisor, who you've met, Professor Fazy, he is very keen on 3 on a thesis by, a PhD by 3 articles published, 3 published articles. But I've just taken on, I mean, we've just got another supervisor who is Professor of Philosophy and Social something or other at the University of Lancaster, and he is more interested in looking at it from a kind of thesis point of view, and in particularly linking. He's very interested in linking my, if you like, my practical activities with these theoretical. So this is something we're just waiting for a coming together of the 2 supervisors. But yeah,
That'll be an interesting meeting.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that just as in a way, Professor Fazy came to me through, in a way, his reference to the shamanic healing. My other supervisor is also a member of the writers group and research group that meets every 6 months at York, and he also runs.
Hi, James. I think you've muted.
You've gone mute, James.
I think somebody's muted us, everybody. Unmute yourself, James.
Yeah?
There we are. Yeah, that's it, Ben.
That's not like me to mute myself.
Yeah.
But
no, you're unmuted now. You're okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of unfolding. Yeah.
Wonderful.
But in a good way, I think.
It's certainly much more focused than it was last time you spoke about your work. So I'm very pleased to feel the progression.
Yeah, thank you. I think this. I mean, the concept of, I mean, looking at. I mean, I've always been interested in the big question that what do we do about the collapse of the culture in which we live, and I think the finding this concept, and of course I've been listening to what Rudolf Steiner says about it for many years, but I felt that in terms of academia and the metacrisis as it is defined, I was very excited to find this guy talking about metamorphosis, and then what I've been trying to do is sort of stitch that into the work that I've been doing with bees, and also stitch that in with the kind of spiritual science and threefoldness.
James, question: are you so some big ideas of society in there? Will you be looking at society as a whole, mankind, or will you also be looking at organizations?
Well, both. Both. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, the way it's organized, whether it's in the form of articles or a thesis, I think the idea of looking at the problem, looking at the process, looking at how it's seen and understood by human beings, and then looking at activity, I think it's in the activity, once you've defined the common sense of what is useful or not, then that's the time to start talking about how you think organizations and individuals, and ultimately, I guess, the world can navigate the meta-crisis.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, after you, after you.
Hello, James. This is Sergio Gaiti.
Hi, Sergio.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Yeah.
Yes, what a surprise, right? So I wanted to ask you, one of the themes that Shannon really developed from threefolding was the interference between realms. And so I'm wondering if and where you're going to touch the subject of obstacles created by interference from one realm to the other. We can say the most well-known interference is the financial and economic realm, basically governing all of the rest of the realms. And one could say the meta-crisis we're living through is actually caused by a misinterpretation of the world as a financial extractive resource for a very specific group of power structure. So I wonder if you're going to touch the concept of interference as well as interconnectedness between realms, because of course you mentioned that there was a growing awareness of how each realm becomes important to consider, but then isn't it a risk to then separate them again and not see their integration or how they can interconnect with each other in a way that the individuality that you talk about is flourishing inside of the wider human organism?
Yeah, you see, I think that I don't know how to put this, but I think what the change of consciousness that we will make will be that shift from head to heart. It'll be out of our intellect, which lives in our microbiome, in our metabolic system, and into our heart, in the sense of the ability of that organ to perceive right and appropriate action. So when you ask a question about how will you deal with the interference, in a way, I think what I think we need to focus on is what it is we should do in the situation in which we find ourselves, and how social groups of any size and shape and order, whether it's the nation or the darts club or whatever, how that group establishes its unique identity by meeting the other. If you spend your time trying to do that, there isn't so much time to in a way debate the big question, and in any case, there's not much one can do about the big question. I think in the third phase, we're looking at the practice. I think we can start unearthing inspiring examples of where we think that has taken place. So, for example, I would, having just read the second book, I'd say that whilst that's not how I would do it if I was in charge, I think that's an inspiring example which shows how, you know, developing human relationships can lead ultimately to a social and economic form.
Thank you.
One last question, maybe?
So, James, I really enjoyed your talk. I think you're quite a stylish, developing quite a stylish academic kind of tone, and I really enjoyed the kind of idea of the end of caterpillar.
Yes, great.
And I'm assuming you're kind of, there's a little reference in there to the pun on the end of capitalism. Not being entirely pessimistic, but do you really think that is happening? The end of capitalism, and I suppose the other thing I want to ask you, you use the word "we" a lot, and "we" refers to nations, the world, individuals, groups. And I suppose for me, and this may be very intentional for you, but in my head I get slightly confused about this "we." Who is this "we"? Because at one point we're talking about genius locus in specific places. At another point, saying that the nation state is kind of redundant, and I tend to agree that it's heading that way, even though people like Nigel Farage would have us believe otherwise. But yeah, who is we, and who does we need to be? Really, I suppose.
Well, I suppose in a way. We is more like I, and you know, and I think it's the kind of it's the, you know, it's the I of know thyself, and it's the I of organization know thyself. It's a kind of you know, if you come to the 19th lesson in the School of Spiritual Science, that almost the final word is "it is I."
Okay.
I think we need to, you know, we need to come back into ourselves, because we can't actually make the connection until you do. I mean, that in a sort of, that in a sense is the meaning of, you know, the essence of meditation and all that sort of stuff. It is to kind of come back into oneself, and I think that's a kind of, we get that for the individual, but I think we've yet to sort of understand that that's also not a metaphor but a model for the group, the de facto nature of groups and organizations.
Thank you.
So I just hear Lawrence Cox's voice. No, I thought I did. I heard Lawrence. I think we. Yes. Okay, it's 5:15, so I think we need to draw it to a close. Any final thoughts from anybody?
Thanks, James. I just wanted to say thank you, and I really like that idea of the imaginal cells that you talked about in the caterpillar. So I've been thinking about that. What is that in the human being? Obviously, it's not biological, it'll be more spiritual, but that gives me a lot of faith in thinking, oh, you know, we do have these kind of imaginal cells, but in maybe a more spiritual way. And it's nice to know that they're going to come into fruition as things develop. And
I think that's an area that I think that's I mean, the mystery, of course, is how does that imaginal cell get there in the beginning of the caterpillar and the butterfly.
Mm.
What it speaks to is that the concept of something being whole from the beginning, and that is exactly what that's exactly Steiner's view of evolution, isn't it?
Yes, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and so and if you take what, like Rupert Sheldrake's view, then you have, you know, about habitual patterns, development of habitual patterns, then that's what gives you the evolutionary, you know, that's the adaptation bit. But the way the whole is there from the beginning.
Mm.
But
Yes.
that gives me a bit of headache when I think about that, actually.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to chew on, but yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
James.
Thanks,
James.
Okay, James, thank
Thank
you.
you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.